So let's do a video about the title of the work. Kritik of pure reason. Kritik der reinen Vernunft. That is only 4 words, but those words can do with some explanation. I will assume that you are familiar with the word of, but I do want to say something about critique, pure, and reason. So let's start with critique. When Kant says that he is going to engage in a critique of reason, what he means is a critical investigation. Right? He wants to think about how reason works, and especially what he is interested in is finding out where the application, where the use of reason is justified. Right? He wants to know where reason can hope to give us knowledge and where reason can't hope to give us knowledge. What are the domains where reason, works and gives us something solid, and what are the domains where we may think we can engage in reason, but actually if we do so, we are the victim of an illusion. So that is what a critique here is. It's trying to, in a sense, draw the limits of the domain of the applicability of reason by doing a self-investigation of reason. Right? The critique of pure reason is going to be reason investigating itself in order to find out where it itself can make valid pronouncements and where it cannot make valid pronouncements. So I think it's important here, maybe because of contemporary usage, to state that critique is not necessarily a negative term. Right? When we talk about criticism or critiquing something, often we mean saying something negative about it, showing that it's wrong or bad or something like that. And that is not the root meaning of this word. In fact, if we think of something like a literary critic is not somebody who says that literature is bad. Right? It's somebody who investigates and thinks about literature and tries to understand it. Critique is also not like a negative term. It's a neutral term. And we're going to find out that, reason is great in some domains and it's, under an illusion and bad maybe in other domains. But the critique is the neutral enterprise of trying to understand reason through reason and limiting its domain of applicability, or rather showing what the limits of its domain of applicability are, thereby ensuring that when we use reason, we use it well, and where we can't use reason, we don't try to. Right? We don't fall prey to the illusions. So that's critique. Okay, what about reason? Well, one of the sins, maybe, of Kant in the critique of pure reason is that he uses reason in 2 different senses, a broad sense and a narrow sense. And probably what he means in the title is the broad sense, where reason is, more or less our ability for rational thought. Right? It's more or less our ability for rational thought, for thinking, for using concepts, stringing those together into judgments, stringing those together into arguments, thinking things through. Right? Something like that. That is, I guess, where we can leave it for now. As we read the critique, we're going to find out that Kant sometimes divides reason into 2 things: the understanding and reason. So that might not be a very good terminological choice, but sometimes Kant uses reason in a more narrow sense, where reason is opposed to the understanding, or at least stands next to or is something different from the understanding. And we'll get to the difference between the understanding and reason in this narrow sense as we move on through the course. Here in the title, we can take reason to be a pretty broad term covering our capacities for rational thought. What about pure? Now, pure means, pure is the opposite of impure here for Kant, and pure means that it doesn't have to do with sensation, that it doesn't have to do with the contents of sensation. So pure reason would be opposed to something like, it would be opposed to impure reason, something like empirical reason, right? When we start thinking about the natural world, what we see of it, what we hear or feel of it, when sensation comes to play a role, and when we are engaged in thinking about the kinds of concepts that are, filled in with sensation, so to speak, like when we think about cows and wonder whether, they are warm-blooded animals or not, then we are not engaged in pure reason, right? Then we are engaged in empirical investigations, and that is not what Kant's book is about, right? Kant's book is not about empirical investigation. It's not about science, although he will have some things to say about that. But what he's interested in here is he is interested in the pure use of reason. So reason applied to pure concepts. Reason applied to those kind of thoughts that do not refer to what is given in sensation. Okay, so that may be, in a sense, clear enough. But what we really need to do is be aware of a potential pitfall when we take into account the title of Kant's second critique. You may know that Kant wrote 3 critiques. The first is the critique of pure reason, the second is the critique of practical reason, and the third is sometimes called the critique of judgment and sometimes the critique of the power of judgment. But I'm interested now in those first 2 titles, right? The critique of pure reason and the critique of practical reason. And if you hear that, you might very well think that Kant believes that there are 2 kinds of reason, pure reason and practical reason. And that is absolutely false. So I think that in retrospect, Kant might have agreed with us that maybe those were not the perfect titles. Anyway, the purity of reason, whether it has something to do with empirical sensations or not, has nothing to do with whether reason is practical. That is, whether it is about how we should act. These are 2 completely different distinctions. There is pure versus impure reason, and then there is theoretical, or as Kant also says, speculative, versus practical reason. So theoretical or speculative versus practical reason, where theoretical reason is about, our knowledge of the world, and practical reason is about how we should act. It's about action. It's about doing things. Now, one word about speculation here. It comes from a Latin word meaning mirror. And really in this kind of context, and also like in later German idealists like Hegel, speculative means something like theoretical. And it doesn't mean what it means for us. Right? When we think of speculation, we think of something for which there are no good arguments, you're just sort of sky high with your imagination. That's not what Kant means. So if we see that word speculative anywhere in the critique, it means something like theoretical. And so the critique of pure reason is actually the critique of pure theoretical reason. And the critique of practical reason is actually the critique of pure practical reason. So it's just as pure. The critique of practical reason is just as pure as the critique of pure reason. So really what we're doing here is we are thinking about reason in its pure theoretical use. Reason, when we use it to think through our knowledge of the world without referring to the contents of sensation. That is the kind of knowledge, the kind of question that Kant is interested in, and then he's going to do a critique, right? He's going to find out where we can have that kind of knowledge, where it makes sense to employ reason, and where we can't have that kind of knowledge, where reason runs into its own limits and cannot hope to gain knowledge.